Morning, dear friends. Morning, Rob. Morning, Katrine. Good morning, Abby. Please take a moment, friends, to settle in and find a comfortable, upright posture. Good morning, Jonathan. And maybe today it's sitting or it's lying down or standing, but taking a moment to check in with what your body needs from you today. To be fully at ease, awake, and we imagine just like dishes neatly stacked, one on top of the other. The spine is upright, but not uptight. Maybe there's a slight curve in the spine. The shoulders drop. Perhaps the feet are firmly planted to the floor, or maybe in a cross-legged position. And the hands are resting on your lap or in a mudra. Intentionally arriving to this dignified posture. And as we turn our sense doors, the windows to our home, as we turn our sense doors inward and close the window to the outside world, checking in with what is going on in here. How's my body today? Is there room to settle and soften? Is there a possibility to loosen and relax some of the ways in which we hold up our posture? So seeing if you need to make any micro adjustments. Allowing the hands to rest. Allowing all the muscles in the face to rest. Allowing the neck and shoulders to soften and relax. And seeing if there's a possibility for the belly to become soft and relaxed. As we sit in our posture, or whatever posture we assume today, notice where the body makes contact with the chair or the cushion. Feeling the body sinking into the earth. being held by the earth. And now I'd like to invite you to become aware of the in breath and the out breath. Breathing in, notice that you're breathing in. Breathing out, notice that you're breathing out. Allowing the breath to comfort you, to nourish you. The healthy, long, and deep breath. Breathing in deep, breathing out long, or breathing in any way that feels most supportive. And feeling the full experience of the breath. You might anchor in the sensations of the breath or the body, or you might anchor in the sounds in the space or the sound of your breath in the back of the throat or nostrils. Or perhaps it's feeling the movement of the shoulders and chest and belly rising and falling. In tune and in touch with the present moment experience. Note the quality of the breath. Is the breath long or short? Is it shallow or deep? And in each moment, noting an in breath as an in breath, an out breath as an out breath. Being careful not to judge, but simply allow the breath to be the way it is, trusting in the breath to take care of you. And as the breath moves through the body, maybe there's room to soften and further sink into your posture. In each moment, discerning, discerning how much energy and effort to apply to remain awake, alert, and relaxed. Wherever you are now, I'd like to invite you to rest your attention where you feel the breath is most alive in the body. Resting in the breath, or perhaps it's resting in the gaps between thoughts, resting in that pause between each breath. Or maybe you choose to rest in openness, the openness of mind. What's here for you now? Is it possible to include all of what arises as part of the experience? Notice what comes up in the field of body or mind. Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Perhaps using the breath to calm and soothe, or to simply let go of any effort and allowing the breath to become natural and subtle, if that's what it's called for. this body and this form is like a lump of foam, and these feeling tones are like bubbles. Perceptions are like a mirage, and mental objects, mind objects, are like a banana tree. They lack a core, like an onion. And consciousness is like a magician's illusion. I'm paraphrasing a, a line from the Buddhist scholar Peter Harvey about the self. This body, material form, is like a lump of foam, and feeling or feeling tone is like a bubble. Perception is like a mirage, and the constructing activities are like a banana tree, lacking a core, like an onion. Consciousness is like a magician's illusion. This idea of I, of the self, what is it made up of? Do we take it to be true and real, or do we recognize perception as perception, beliefs as beliefs, views as views? They're not the truth, they're simply just views. And these feelings come and go like bubbles, like clouds, ever changing, always in flux. And what happens when we take it to be the truth, that it becomes our reality? I'd like to share with you a discourse. This is from one of the Buddhist sutras called the Samyukta Agama. It's one of the earliest teachings of the Buddha that was from an oral transmission and then eventually became finally written into a book, written down. And the Venerable Sariputra shares a simile of when we take this mind to be true and we are hijacked by our body, feelings, perception, the mental formations, and consciousness. It is like the son of a son of a householder who is very rich and has much wealth. He seeks widely for a retinue, an attendant that will protect his wealth. Then an evil person who is his enemy pretends to have come as a close friend in order to become his attendant. He often waits for an opportunity, going to sleep late and rising early, looking after him nearby when he rests. This person is careful and respectful in their affairs, modest in his words, causing his master to think of him with delight, to perceive him as a friend, to perceive him as a son with utmost trust and without doubts, without guarding himself. It gets kind of brutal here. Later on, with a sharp knife in his hand, he cuts off his master's life. Had that householder actually understood that the man pretending to be a friend wished his harm, would he have well guarded himself and not suffered harm? It is like this. In the same way, a untrained person perceive that these five aggregates, bodies, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, they perceive it as permanent. They perceive them as ease, perceive them as health, perceive them as the self, perceive them as belonging to the self. So the untrained person guarding and cherishing these five aggregates of clinging, in the end, they are harmed by the enemy of these five aggregates, just as that householder was harmed by the enemy pretending to be his friend without realizing it. How often has thoughts and feelings and beliefs led to depression, led to suicide, led to sabotaging, sabotaging the self? And all of what we see in the destruction of self comes from the mind and what it creates this world into being from that place of mind, beliefs, views, perceptions, mind objects. So when one takes the mind to be the chief, to be the master, and especially an untrained mind, a mind that maybe is hungry for power or hungry for validation or hungry to be seen, to affirm itself, hungry for reputation, what happens? And so that is one way we can look at and contemplate the aggregates. These are called the aggregates, a collection of mental processes that are always occurring within this self. Notice what it creates and what it destroys. Notice what it gives birth to and what it also put an end to. And an untrained mind can be quite destructive. However, a trained mind sees thoughts and know that they are simply just thoughts, sees feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, as simply pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Don't need to change or fix it or do something to get rid of it or to get more of it. But this is the feeling of this moment. It's like this. And to know the body as this vessel that is prone to aging, sickness, and death. And upon that recognition, the attempt to try to change it or make it different or stop or reverse nature no longer has become a central point of our suffering. But there is this recognition of how things really are and the amount of energy and lamentation that goes into the fear, the worries of this body is now gone. no longer a point of suffering, but rather something to accept as a part of this human experience, understanding the aggregates as the aggregates. And we can contemplate this daily. We can contemplate consciousness. Consciousness meaning when there's an object and there is the organs of the eyes or ears or nose, tongue, body, or mind. It comes in contact with that object, whether physical or mental. And then there's the eye consciousness or ear consciousness. And that gives rise to a whole set of experience, leading to beliefs and thoughts, leading to ideas and views and preferences. So these five aggregates are constantly at play, happening all at once, simultaneously, forming this sense of self, this we take to be me, it's mine, it's mine. And upon that recognition, we still are this me with preference, this my, this I. But we hold ourselves very lightly. We hold these views, these beliefs very loosely. There isn't clinging and grasping to this sense of self. There is a recognition and acknowledgement of self. But maybe we don't take it too seriously or personally. And that's where we experience some freedom from suffering. The stronger the sense of self is, the stronger the suffering is, the greater the suffering is. The more attached we are to the sense of self, to the five aggregates, the more we are burdened and weighed down because of this that we take to be true and real and permanent. When the laws of impermanence is always at play, just like nature, ever changing, blooming and withering away, giving birth and dying. And when there's that belief that there's a permanent sense of self, there is suffering because there's attachments, there's clinging, there's a strong identification to that which doesn't remain the same. And just like a rose, where can you find the fragrance of the rose? Is the fragrance in the stem? Is it in the leaves? Is it in the thorns? Is the fragrance in the stamen? Is it in the finer or coarser parts of the rose? Or is it distinct from these parts? So where is the fragrance of the rose? It's not in the stem or the leaves or the stamen, but it's also not distinct from these parts. So is true with the five aggregates. They are not us, they are not you, but they are also not distinct and separate from you. So I will pause there and perhaps invite your voices into this reflection, this contemplation. What's there for you now? Is this making sense, or are you grappling with this teaching? Perhaps it leaves a lot to ponder about. And this is the distinction with Buddhist thought versus schools of thought that believe that there's a soul. So here in Buddhist thoughts, the belief is that there is no soul, no self. There is just these five aggregates, which makes up the self. But then is there really a self if these are all just processing? Just like everything in the universe, all process. Even that atom is not a solid entity. That atom is a process. And so are we, a process in the making, forming, shaping, breaking apart, recreated, coming together, falling apart. We are that phenomena that is here for a little while and then gone. And the Buddha says all phenomena are subject to impermanence. All conditioned phenomena are subject to impermanence. There are certain conditions that are required for that atom to form. There are conditions that are required for this body, this human being to come into existence, to be as it is today.
Trina, I'm curious about awareness and consciousness. And I think sometimes consciousness immediately follows awareness, and then maybe the awareness is gone, but it sort of happens pretty fast. So I don't really know what to make of that.
Mm. Yeah, consciousness, you're right. It happens very fast inside of the mental process that occurs. Um, it is probably helpful to define consciousness and how it's being used in different traditions and in common everyday language. The word consciousness, even the word conscious alone, when it's used in our everyday language, is used in place of the word aware. I'm conscious of something, I'm aware of something, right? Um, so if we speak in more Buddhist lingo, we don't use the word conscious. We use the word aware or mindful. So then also the word consciousness itself is in many spiritual traditions, consciousness is referring to that higher level of mind, right? Uh, the higher consciousness. And that higher consciousness is awareness, pure awareness. Mhm. And sometimes that term is used so loosely that consciousness, my consciousness is still speaking, a person could still be speaking from the level of the mind. Because if there's a my consciousness, where is that coming from? Right? It's still coming from mind. Ideas, thoughts, revelation, still mind. Mhm. And so in the Buddhist term, the word consciousness here, we are referring to, how does consciousness come into being? If there's no eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind that makes contact with objects or smell or taste or mind objects, there wouldn't be consciousness. It would cease to exist, right? So it's still self. Consciousness wouldn't exist without self. And then there's that, which we know in spiritual terms as the collective consciousness. There's my consciousness, which is connected to collective consciousness. And that is, again, we have to really break down what that means if we are looking at it from the lens of Buddhism to help us really get clear on the meaning, because these terms can really get confusing. So, um, this is why a lot of times with, the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, a lot of times we refer back to the Pali Sanskrit words. So it doesn't get confusing, like the word feeling. In when I refer to the word feeling here, it's actually talking about the feeling tones, you know, feeling tones meaning pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, the Vedanas. But when we speak in everyday language, I have this feeling. Sometimes that feeling could mean I have this intuition or I have this emotion, right? And so it could mean so many things. Um, yeah, I hope that helps. Does that answer your question?
That does help. I think you're right. Language is sometimes it's our best friend and sometimes it's our worst enemy, because there are a lot of different contexts. And I think that's one of the things that I actually struggle with in my studying of Buddhism, is that I keep trying to find the earliest writings, the earliest references, the less translation, by language and by other people's thinking, the better in my mind. But I don't know what anyone else thinks about that, but that's certainly a strong curiosity of mine, because I do have some concern about how things can get changed by cultural context, etc.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Hence, there's so many Buddhist scholars who commit their time to translating and trying to arrive at concise words based on the limited um, a bank of words in the English, right, language. And so when we as practitioners are curious and we're studying and we want to get to when we want to understand the teaching, sometimes seeing multiple versions of it helps, because certain words, multiple words of, let's say, the word feelings, right? When it's given many different definition, and then simile and metaphor and stories to illustrate it, helps us to really get what that means. Um, so like mm, it's and it's and that's why I so much appreciate Buddhist scholar. They're not trying to do this heady intellectual thing so much as the intention is coming from that place to help our English practitioners be able to find this, right, be able to make sense of the teaching using all these different words and translation. So some teachers will have multiple words that they'll add to their bank when they try to translate some of the teachings. And the Buddha is very skillful in using metaphors and simile for that reason. Mhm. And so sometimes we, even though like it's interesting because on one end it's really important, like in my role when I'm speaking, to clarify and uh, um, this give a new meaning to certain words. Um, there's also this invitation to for us to capture the essence of it, to not get so hung up on the words. Like from a speaker standpoint, I have to be very careful with words, but as we were in the learning, to not get hung up on the words, but capture the essence and contemplate it, right? And find the metaphors and similes and different stories around the teachings that help us awaken to its true meaning. Mhm.
Trina, I share some of what Rob is getting at in language, and what you're saying about language is, for me, as I try to increase my knowledge here, the words themselves sometimes are stumbling blocks, not clarifications. So that the ones I'm thinking of this morning are aggregates. So I try to get my brain around, what does the word aggregate say to me? How am I to understand that? The difference between mental formations and mental perceptions. What is the difference between a formation and a perception? What do those words help me do? The language is sometimes obscuring to me, not helpful to me. And yet we have to have these terms that somehow pull things together, that say this is the object that we're talking about. So at my level of understanding and awareness of these terms and concepts, and I love what's buried in there, and body and feeling tones that I can grasp. when I get to mental formations and mental perceptions, there's kind of no there for me. How can I get a hold of this? How can I bring this into an understanding of something? Why is it aggregates? How is that term helpful? And so it's helpful to me to understand that these were not the original words used. And so we're reaching for something that helps tether a language I don't speak, whether it's Pali or Sanskrit, to an understanding that fits in the world that I live in, the time that I live in. And I getting through that to really making that part of my awareness and consciousness is hard because the language itself obscures as much as it reveals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Abby. Mental formations. Other translation for mental formation is mental volition. These are the sankhara, the impressions, or sometimes also known as habit energies, mental habit energies. And it's conditioned by the past, maybe past is in this lifetime or past within previous lifetimes that shape, what arises in the mind, and what has us carry out and further this into being. It shapes our activities. It shapes what we do. Um, it shapes our desire, our interest, our intent. And yeah, I hear what you're saying with that with these ways that we are using English as a means to capture the teaching and understand it. I think of the word for many years, I was also had a hard time with the word aggregates too. But when I think of like aggregates being in construction, working out hardscape and outdoors, I think of like, these aggregates, it's like they're clumped together, these five little pebbles or whatever, they're clumped together and they're um, very rough and coarse, and they're clumped together and they're always simultaneously happening, and they're happening so fast, this process of what makes up the self. And I think there's a degree of like learning and getting the teaching and having some context enough for us to have it sit there in the background. And then 80% of it is us practicing. And then when things arise, the teaching is revealed or affirmed or verified through our experience. So I always have this view that, in each moment as practitioners, we are discerning, okay, is this enough teaching? I've had my dose, and now I need to practice more, right? Just focus on the practice. And then, okay, when the practice starts to get dry or things get stale with the practice, okay, I need to infuse in more teaching now and really till the soil, right? So it's always this discernment and balancing, how much to spend in the teaching and learning, and then how much to devote to the actual practice. And then apply just this one line of the teaching for example, or these few words, and contemplate them daily as we move through the world. So that has always been something that I see is where we work to balance that teaching, studying the Dharma, and then practice. And I always lean more towards the practice side. And then sometimes there are practitioners who practice and they arrive at some insight or awakening, and it's real, but they don't have the words to make sense of it. So then that's where the teachings come in and help contextualize the experience. And upon that experience being contextualized, all of a sudden something lands like, oh, that's what happened. So it could happen either way, or a person can come in with the teachings first, and then as they are traversing the path, it's like, oh, I know what this is. I get it now because I've learned about this, and here it is happening. Right. So we can take either approach. Mm-hmm. Yeah, more practice allows us the teachings to saturate and penetrate through us. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. To me, it's like an integration when we practice, and then the teaching is now understood on a experiential level, on a visceral level. That's the integration, the embodiment, the embodiment of the Dharma within our experience, within our lived experience. Mm.
If I could just contradict myself now, from what I just said, uh, this is a great point that you make, and it really makes me appreciate how, we each have to discover the meaning, you know, um, and for something such as this that has survived 2,500 years, uh, it doesn't go untouched by those that come in contact with it, in the sense that you get different translations, you get different schools of thought, you get variations on a theme, but I think it's up to each of us to really discover the essence that uh, strikes a chord, so to speak. And in that sense, which I feel I'm still struggling to do, but I also feel that when I do feel a little bit of progress in that direction, and then I relax a little bit more about the language and the words. And maybe that's what I mean by they can be your best friend or your worst enemy, because sometimes you trip over some of these things, and then if you kind of relax and maybe go if I go easy on myself and sort of take a little more gentle approach, then things sort of sprout on their own, it seems. So anyway, I talk too much as it is. So, but that's kind of an interesting thing, and I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Mm. Mm. The five aggregates are a collection of mental processes. And at one point, I've heard it, and it really landed with me this time when it was the aggregates are also known as heaps of clinging. So it's a pile of this that we cling to, heaps of clinging.
It makes me think of something that I asked one of my friends one time. I asked him, how sticky are your paradigms? Because I know some of mine are very sticky, and it's hard for me to let them go or to break them apart. But uh, heaps of clinging, that's good. Thank you.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate you using the word sticky, because we become binded to it, right? There's this bondage to this I, this me, my. There's a grasping the self. Mhm. How sticky are your paradigms? I really like that. Does anyone else have anything you'd like to share, reflect, or comment? Question? Dear friends, mm, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you've come to practice. And thank you for contributing to the space through your presence and your comments and questions. And this is a very rich and in-depth topic, and we can spend many hours and many days and years reflecting on this. And as we continue throughout this day, I invite you to notice when the clinging to views, perceptions, beliefs, preferences, and all that makes up the self becomes a point of suffering or tension. And when that loosens, is there freedom? Is there ease? Is there satisfaction? So may you continue to dwell in the Dharma today. May you delight in the Dharma, and may you go well into this journey of this day with you, yourself, and your body. I wish you well. Thank you, dear friends. Ready for takeoff to infinity and beyond.